Back on the Rob Dibble Show with Ben Darnell on your afternoon drive. 4th of July hangover.
Oh, yeah. You got all your fingers.
I do. I didn't mess around with fireworks. Dom Amore joins us on the Rob Dibble Show hotline from the Hartford Current, covers UConn sports and Major League Baseball, has a Hall of Fame vote. He joins us now. Dom, how are you?
Hey, Dom.
Good. Always fireworks when I come on the show, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's just start with the Mets. The fact that they're 18 games out of first place, their payroll, how much longer are the owners going to put up with this nonsense?
Well, I guess the answer is not much longer. I think he's very patient. He's very methodical and analytical in how he does business, and he always has been. But I do think that he would probably, at the end of this season, consider it a failed experiment and go in a new direction, particularly in the front office. That's my guess. And I think they have to take a look at what the way this team was put together and do it differently. I think they paid a lot of role players a lot of money, which a lot of teams don't do. That kind of jacks up their payroll. Fourth outfielders or utility type players. They didn't get the big star that they went for because of the career, the physical. And so I think that's one of the problems. And also they loaded up. They put a lot of money on older pitchers, figuring it would be a 1 or 2 year win now thing, and that didn't work. So I think at the end of the season they're going to have to take a look at how they do business and if a different model is necessary. And hey, Rob, we've seen a million examples of it. Money doesn't mean you're going to have the best team or that you're going to have the best players or that you're going to know what to do with them if you do get the best players. It just means you're going to have a lot of age and you're going to pay a lot of people for what they've already done.
That's exactly what we're looking at. 18 games out of first. They're 6.5 out of the wild card. Are you telling me this season's a wash and these guys might be sold in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I do think that if they're a little bit closer this month, that they will not sell. I think if they're within 2 or 3 games of a wild card, I don't think they'll do that because, look at what the Phillies did. Think about where the Phillies were this time last year, or thereabouts. So, I wouldn't completely write this season off as far as stealing a wild card spot, grabbing a wild card spot if they have a good second half. Obviously, I don't think they're catching the Braves at this point. I think that ship sailed. But no, I think if you get a little bit closer, get to within 2.5, 3 games of a wild card spot, then they might take a shot, try to get a couple of veteran players, fill a couple of holes, and do it. But I think they've got to do something with their bullpen. I think they really need an established closer, even if it's a rent-a-closer for the rest of this year, if they're going to make a serious run at it.
Dom, I don't know if we've seen this kind of mediocrity in a long time, but you got the Padres are awful. They're below 500 by 6 games. The Dodgers aren't that great. Phillies, right. Big payrolls. So try to, Ben and I were just talking about this. Somewhere these guys were sold a bill of goods that it's okay to hit 200, 220. It's okay to have a 4.5, 5 ERA, and have 8 guys in the bullpen. I was going over the All-Star teams this year. We're up to 36 aside. When does it end with the average is okay at the major league level? Because I never thought that average would get me to the big leagues.
Yeah, it's the de-emphasis of batting average, the way hitters are coached, the way they're taught, is really now swamped the major league level with a lot of guys that are hitting under 200. You could stay in a lineup today hitting under 200 if you draw enough walks, I guess, and so that your on-base percentage is high enough. But, I've always thought on-base percentage and batting average go hand in hand. You're not going to have a high on-base percentage if you're hitting 190. Who has high on-base percentages? So guys who hit 330, because even with a moderate number of walks, they're going to have a 400 on-base percentage. And instead of walks, they're getting hits that bring runners around. So, really the whole way that hitters are coached and pitchers are coached, we've talked about, hitters are taught how to swing, not how to hit or compete. Pitchers are taught how to pitches, not how to get hitters out and compete. And I think that's what you see at the major league level. I think some of the veteran players that go back to previous eras are still maybe, it didn't work out for the Mets, but that's still basically what you're looking at is guys like a Verlander or a Scherzer who know how to compete. Garrett Cole's a throwback to that because he pitched with those guys, knows how to compete. And that's what I think you see lacking in the major leagues today.
The boys clued me in on the tribute video Aaron Hicks received going back to New York's Yankee Stadium as he's a Baltimore Oriole now and had kind of the last laugh with the big hit in that ball game. Well, what were your thoughts on that? You more upset that he got a tribute video or more upset the fans booed them? Yeah,
I think that's one of those things that's really overdone.
I agree. I'm with you on this, yes.
Now, and I mean, that's an understatement, right? Jonquel Jones comes back to play the Connecticut Sun, do a tribute video. That's just fine.
Hear.
But, having what it kind of reminded me of a little bit, and there was a booing involved, but, when the Yankees would do different videos for different past players, music, they would have like a Mickey Mantle video, and they would have like a Yogi Berra video, and they would have a Bernie Williams video. They had all these different videos. And when Flash Flaherty became a broadcaster, they did one for him. And they had this big, long video of all these highlights that Flash Flaherty, a backup catcher, had with the Yankees. It basically consisted of the one big hit against Boston in 2004 and the 2 home run game at Baltimore one year. And they do this whole big video set to Irish music. And when it's over, Jorge Posada walks out of the dugout, looks up at the press box, and spreads his hands as if to say, WTF was that? So yeah, a tribute video for Aaron Hicks I thought was a bit much, and really given the circumstances, it's almost like they invited the fans to boo him. Which it's probably time for the fans to let that go. But why egg them on or goad them on with a tribute video, which basically consisted of that great throw that he made against the Twins to end the game. That's about it, right? So that was a little perplexing to me.
I spent a wonderful weekend, a couple different parties with some people that grew up watching the Brooklyn Dodgers, watching the New York Giants, huge Mets fans. And they talked about Mickey Mantle, and they talked about Willie Mays and all that kind of they saw Joe DiMaggio play. I was absolutely fascinated by it. You were writing in the Hartford Current about 100 years ago, Lou Gehrig came through Hartford. Describe what that meant for Lou Gehrig and his career. Just talk about Lou Gehrig for a second, and he passed way too young, but this guy was one of the greatest baseball players that ever lived.
Yeah, by the way, just to clarify, I wrote about Lou Gehrig 100 years ago. I wasn't writing 100 years ago.
I didn't say you were writing 100 years ago. He came through Hartford, right, 100 years ago.
There's some confusion about that. But, I think what I tried to do with the story, and I hope I succeeded, was to basically humanize Lou Gehrig. He's an icon, and you think of him giving that incredible speech that he gave, that incredible, courageous speech, and the incredibly courageous way he handled the illness that now bears his name. And, of course, you think about him playing all those games, the Iron Man, the Iron Horse, and all those achievements. But, in the flesh, he was just like any other ball player, struggling to try to make his way and to try to learn and to try to develop his skills and all the same things that we see 100 years later with the Hartford Yard Goats, when we see great prospects struggle and try to adjust and find their way, or we watch Anthony Volpe struggle and try to adjust their way. And they need the right coaching, they need the right guidance, they need the right words, whispered in their ear, the right approaches, and they need time and patience to learn their craft. I mean, that's all. As Gehrig goes, he probably learned all those things quicker than most people do. But, he was a guy that, was disheartened when he came to Hartford. He was disheartened after he got here and had just a short slump. But then he caught fire, and man, did he go crazy? 24 home runs in only 59 games, and ended up in the major leagues, and would have played in the World Series that year, except that he came up in September and wasn't eligible, and the Giants wouldn't give the Yankees a waiver to do it because they were bitter that they had lost out on him. But it was really I tried to present that 100 years ago, before he's the Lou Gehrig that we know all about, he was a minor league ball player trying to find his way, and he found his way in Hartford.
How many of those guys back then, and how significant were their injuries? How many of them played hurt and no one knew about it, but then we find out a long time after they did? I've heard the stories of Mickey Mantle. I'm just thinking of this because of all these all-stars that are not going to be playing the all-star game that are worth the price of admission to go to any ballpark to watch play. What was it like back then as far as just guys playing through pain, playing injured, and not finding out about it until 20 years after?
Well, the biggest thing was in those days, guys, is that there was no free agency and there was no long-term contracts. So here, a player had to sit down with the general manager and ask for a raise and negotiate a raise based on, and the first thing that the general manager would bring out was games played or innings pitched. That went in. That's why, guys pitched complete games. They threw 300 innings because that was their biggest bargaining chip when they went to sit down for their new contract. So guys they played with injuries. They got out there and tried to play with injuries because they knew that missing a month, missing 2 months probably could cost them half their salary the next season. So, or cause them to get traded, or with only 16 teams, maybe cause them to be out of the game the next year. So guys were determined to play with all but the most debilitating of injuries. I seriously doubt Mickey Mantle would have missed an inning with an oblique injury. He would have played through that. Very few pitchers, most pitchers. I always remember, Andy Pettitte kind of complaining about something in his elbow, and Joe Torre was trying to help him out, figure it out, and he talked to Bob Gibson, and he told Bob Gibson what Pettitte was experiencing, and Gibson said, "Tell him everybody has that." so that's kind of what it was like. I mean, the kind of injuries. Now we know more about injuries today than we did then,
right?
And it's not necessarily a good thing. There are also stories about the Dodgers' Pete Reiser playing despite having a fractured skull, and he was up there playing and he couldn't even see the ball, so there, he was always running into walls. So there's a bad side to that too. It's good that we know more about injuries,
right.
Know more about how to take care of them, especially head injuries, and certainly when teams spend a lot of money, invest a lot of money in years in a free agent, they don't want to wreck his career with a short-term for a short-term gain. I'm always reminded the first really long-term free agent contract, Catfish Hunter signs a 5-year contract with the Yankees, pitched 328 innings the first year of that contract, and was never the same after that. So there's an upside and a downside to it, but I do think with a lot of soft tissue injuries, I think players just don't play through those injuries today, which they used to back in the day.
No, and I'm looking at this story because I was thinking about Ken Griffey Jr. or Sr. telling me a story, and Lee May and Tony, where the general manager said, "Don't even show up for spring training then if you're going to argue over $500." March 30th, 1966, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale ended their double holdout in spring training by signing for, get this, a whopping $130,000 and $105,000 respectively. Those are two future Hall of Famers, by the way.
An inning for Garrett Cole.
They wanted $1 million each over 3 years. And they didn't get it, but that's what they signed, when they ended their holdout. Describe that. I mean, back in the day, without free agency, when the owners really had these guys by the you-know-whats, it had to be an awful task to just try to get any kind of raise out of them.
Yeah, it was brutal to try to do that. They didn't even want players to bring agents. Players brought agents in. That was considered a no-no. It's a famous story in football was that, player called Vince Lombardi and said he wanted him to negotiate with his agent, and Vince Lombardi said, "I'll get back to you." And he called back 10 minutes later and said, "Tell your agent to negotiate with the Eagles. You're now with them."
Yep. I've heard that story.
And that's kind of what it was like. They didn't want you to have agents even. And players, a lot of these players, when they were not college educated, they were coming from farms and small towns, and they would be out-talked and out-maneuvered, in negotiations. And there was there's a story when Moose Skowron was with the Yankees. He had great year after great year and great World Series after one after another. And he would always get kind of talked down by the GM in the contract negotiations, and he'd never get a raise. And after 4 or 5 years, the players finally got to him and said, hey, you got to stand up and ask for this and ask for that. And finally got started getting modest raises every year. But yeah, it was difficult. The players had no leverage. The only leverage they had was to hold out. And one time, the Yankees put out an opening day media guide with all these opening day facts and figures, and I saw that the number of opening day starts that's in center field, Bernie Williams had the record, and I noticed that there were very few by Joe DiMaggio. And you know the reason? Because he held out just about every year for more money. And he ended up missing opening day several times in the 30s and the 40s. So that's kind of what it was like. One time DiMaggio asked for a raise, and the general manager said, Lou Gehrig doesn't even make that much, and he's been here 14 years. And DiMaggio's answer was, well, Mr. Gehrig's very underpaid.
Yep.
So there was always a lot of that, and I guarantee you that Koufax and Drysdale were probably vilified in the press and by the fans for asking even for that.
Gosh, I love these.
Holding out as a duo was something Ruth wanted Gehrig to do, and Gehrig wouldn't do it. And that was one of the things that caused friction between them later in their careers. So, yeah, it was a very, very different world. Many of the changes are probably for the better, but not all of them. You lose some of that year-to-year hunger that you had when players had to go every year and kind of sing for their supper.
I got a historical stat you probably already know. The Baltimore Orioles have been playing 123 seasons of baseball in major leagues and have been to the playoffs 14 times. That's right, 14 times. What do you think about this year? For our Orioles fans that always get at us whenever we see an Orioles fan, like, hey, how are the Orioles doing this?
You don't talk enough Orioles.
Are they buyers this year? They're sitting in first place in the wild card. They're behind the Rays, second place in the AL East.
Yeah, so that's counting the St. Louis Browns, right? That number of years, I guess.
I'm guessing. I knew you would throw some kind of caveat that I had no idea about. Congratulations. I will say yes, you are correct.
Yeah, because the St. Louis Browns. Well, now of course a lot of that is, and also a lot of that's when there were no playoffs. You had to go right to the World Series, and they only made it a couple of times. Then, no, I would say they're buyers. I think the one thing with the extra playoffs, with the extra team extra wild card, extra rounds of playoffs, and you don't have that one game do or die thing anymore. It's a 3-game series. It's very worth being a buyer at the deadline, and the Orioles should be buyers. The Yankees should be buyers. The Blue Jays should be buyers.
Red Sox
the Rangers should be buyers.
Red Sox.
I wouldn't write them off yet. I think like the Mets, if they get a little bit closer and have a good month of July, they should be buyers. I mean, I think that wild card's within reach, and it's worth getting because I think, I think the teams in the American League, especially, I think the top teams in the American League, I think, are gettable in a short series. So getting a wild card, I think, has value. So, yeah, to answer your question about the Orioles, yeah, they should be buyers, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be buyers. They should have the wherewithal to take on a contract or two.
Always a pleasure, Mr. Amore. Appreciate you coming on, giving us a few minutes of your expertise, and hopefully you're well and well rested after the 4th of July weekend. Thank you.
You got it, guys. Hey, thanks for having me.
Dom Amore, everybody. When we come back, we'll do the first dibs question of the day, sponsored by Trantolo and Trantolo.
97.